Hello and welcome back to Clarkenomics. In this video, we're going to elaborate on a topic called gross domestic product by talking about something called real gross domestic product, otherwise known as real GDP. So, the GDP, gross domestic product, that I had talked about in a previous video is actually better known as nominal GDP. So, here's what that means. Nominal GDP uses current prices to calculate the value of production. One of the things that we said when we kind of first defined GDP, when we had the definition of GDP, is that it's the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given time. Well, since we're measuring in currency, right, we need to know prices to calculate the value of something. So when we talk about nominal GDP, we're using current prices. In other words, the prices from that year to calculate the value of production. And this might not be immediately clear what I'm talking about, but once we have a little bit more information, it should make more sense. So again, from the video that precedes this one, we said that GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. That's consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus exports minus imports. So here's the problem though. Prices are not static, meaning they're not still. They change all the time, right? Prices rise, prices fall, not just for certain products, but for the price level of a country overall, right? The prices of everything rise and fall. And so if you're trying to compare time periods, right? If you want to compare this year's GDP to last year's GDP, well, that can be tricky to do because prices might be different in one year than they are in a different year. So it's almost like trying to measure something using, yardsticks which are constantly changing. That's what money is, right? Money is just a measurement of value, but it changes all the time. So here are a couple terms that we're definitely going to get to know a little bit better in the future, but for now, just the basic definition. Inflation. Inflation is when money loses its value. In other words, when prices go up. So when you think inflation, think about prices inflating, right? That's what inflation means. And then there's deflation, which is pretty simple because it's just the opposite. It's when your money is becoming more valuable. In other words, the prices of things are falling. Prices are deflating. So because prices are rising and falling, that makes it really tricky to measure production over time using nominal GDP. So to make this a little bit clearer, we're going to imagine that instead of C plus I plus G plus NX, we're going to say a country only produces one thing, and what else would it be? But widgets. So here we go. In 2019, let's imagine that a country produced 100 widgets. We're also going to imagine that the price of a widget is $5. So again, we don't have to mess with all these different letters and stuff like that. We just have one thing, widgets, and we're calculating the dollar value of widgets produced. So in 2019, that means that the nominal GDP would just be 100 widgets times $5 per widget. The GDP in 2019 would be $500. We're using that year's prices and that year's production. In 2020, let's imagine the country produced 100 widgets, same as the previous year, but for some reason the price of a widget has changed, right? There's been a supply shift or a demand shift or whatever, and the price of a widget is now $10. So can we calculate the 2020 nominal GDP? Well, sure we can. 100 widgets, because that's the only thing that we make, times $10 per widget would make the nominal GDP $1,000 for 2020. So hopefully here you can see the problem, right? Because if we're only looking at nominal GDP numbers, it looks like production doubled from 2019 to 2020. Look, the GDP was 500 in 2019, it's 1,000 in 2020. That must mean we made twice as much stuff, right? Right? Wrong. Because, we have the production data right here. Same number of widgets were produced in both years, right? Production did not change at all. But because the price of a widget inflated from $5 to $10, it made it look like production had doubled. And that's the problem with nominal GDP. It uses the current year's prices to calculate the GDP statistics. So what we're going to use instead is something much better. We're going to use real GDP. So real GDP is a good way to get rid of the effects of price changes, essentially. And it's a pretty simple thing to do. So what you do is you choose one year, doesn't matter which year, but you choose some year as what's called a base year. A base year. In this table below, I've chosen year 1 as the base year. Just an arbitrary choice. I could have chosen year 2 or year 3. Now, the trick of real GDP is that we always use the price from the base year. That way we don't have to worry about the price changing from year to year. We're using the same price each year. So let's go through this table and see if we can make some sense of it. Year 1, 50 widgets produced. Let's imagine that the price of a widget is $2. What would be the nominal GDP for year 1? Well, 50 widgets, $2 per widget. That would be $100. Now, what's the real GDP for year 1? Well, that's easy because we only have one price to use. It'd just be $100. In the base year, real GDP and nominal GDP are always the same number. Always. Now, let's take a look at year 2. In year 2, 50 widgets produced just like year 1, but now the price of a widget has doubled, just like our example from the previous slide. So what would be the nominal GDP for year 2? Well, 50 widgets times $4 per widget, that would give us a nominal GDP of $200. But we know that that's making it look like production doubled, when in fact it did not. It stayed the same. This is where real GDP becomes helpful, because what we're going to do, since we know year 1 is the base year, is we're going to use not the price of $4 to calculate real GDP, we're going to use the price from the base year, that is $2. So now 50 times $2 is $100. So you'll notice that the real GDP didn't change, nor should it have, because production did not change between those 2 years. So real GDP has removed the effect of inflation in the price of widgets. Let's do another year. In year 3, 100 widgets were produced. Okay, so production actually did go up. The price of a widget in year 3, $4. What would be the nominal GDP in year 3? Well, that's 100 widgets times $4, $400. But what would the real GDP be for year 3? Well, we produced 100 widgets, we know that, but we need to use the base year price, which is, there's the base year, there's the price, $2. And so the real GDP for year 3 would be $200. And so that makes it look like production doubled from year 1, or doubled from year 2. And did it? Well, actually, yeah, it did. This is 100, this is 50. So again, that's what real GDP is good for. It removes the effects of price changes, like inflation or like deflation, and actually allows us to make comparisons over time accurately. Because that's one of the main functions of GDP numbers, is to see what's the economy doing. Are we producing more? Are we producing less? Because there are so many important things that come out of that. So this is some actual data here. Typically today we use 2012 as the base year. And so you'll notice that in 2012, these two lines are the same. The blue line is nominal GDP. It doesn't say nominal there, but that's what it is. And the red line is real GDP. And of course, in the base year, like I previously said, they're always going to be the same number because the base year prices are the prices that we're using. But what you can see happening here is, over time, nominal GDP is rising by this much, and real GDP is rising by less. What must that actually mean is happening with prices? Think about it a little bit here. If nominal GDP is above real GDP, that must mean that prices are rising. You can use any of the previous slides that we've done to justify that. So if nominal GDP is greater than real GDP, prices must be going up. If nominal GDP were ever below real GDP, well, that would actually mean that prices are going down. There's deflation happening. So again, in the previous video, we talked about how the US GDP was over 21 trillion. Well, that was a nominal number. There's nominal GDP over 21 trillion, about 21.5 trillion. Real terms, the US GDP is actually just over $19 trillion. And when it comes down to it, which is more important to look at, the real GDP is always more important to look at than the nominal GDP. So that's just some data to back up what we're talking about. All right, so that's all I have in this video. Thanks for watching.